can hear you and see you perfectly. Thank you.
Rebecca, this is Katrina. I think we're going to get started.
Sounds good, Commissioner Kessler. Thank you.
All right. Well, good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Katrina Kessler, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Commissioner of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and the co-chair of the Governor's Subcabinet on Climate Change. And I really want to thank you all for being here. I'm excited to welcome you on behalf of the Subcabinet as well as the administration to this really important conversation about our shared vision around climate and the climate action framework. I think this is the beginning and the continuation of a really critical conversation. And so just thanks again for being a part of it and for continuing to play a role in this really critical work. State leaders are developing this framework with input from many of you as well as our tribal partners, and the framework is set so that we can prioritize bold action, new ideas, and really ensure that new voices, including tribal nations and communities that have been disproportionately impacted by climate change, are heard, and that everyone realizes the economic and environmental benefits that can be realized if we attack this challenge correctly. So we're here today to discuss the way that everyone is feeling the impacts of climate change across the state, and whether that's in municipal settings or business settings, across natural landscapes and in our urban landscapes, and the steps that we can take as Minnesotans to collectively prepare for and address these changes. The ultimate goal is to finalize a climate action framework that reflects our collective experiences and prioritizes communities across the state, and your participation is really critical and crucial to making this a reality. Joining us today are members of the Climate Change Subcabinet, the Environmental Quality Board, as well as the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change. So thank you to all of those people who are in our virtual room. The Subcabinet, for those of you who don't know, was established when Governor Walz signed Executive Order 1937, and it includes the commissioners from the Department of Natural Resources, the Department of Labor and Industry, Minnesota Management and Budget, Employment and Economic Development, Department of Ag, Department of Public Safety, Commerce, Housing, MnDOT, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, Department of Admin, Met Council, of course, the Environmental Quality Board, and Minnesota Housing Financing Authority. So just as well as the Department of Health. And I just really appreciate all of those commissioners and their staff for their continued commitment. In addition to the Subcabinet, the Climate Advisory Committee, there are members of the Climate Advisory Committee here today, and that includes 15 members that were appointed by Governor Walz from civic and community leaders, as well as individuals with experiences in business, ag, conservation, and environmental protection. And then finally, I mentioned the EQB, and for those of you who don't know, the Environmental Quality Board is also made up of 9 agency heads, as well as 7 citizen members. So we have a collection of those groups all together here. And in the interest of time, I ask the members in attendance from those groups to introduce yourselves in the chat, and you can delineate your role in the Subcabinet, in the EQB, or on the Advisory Council, or any other important roles that you want to make sure that are captured and people know. So we can keep moving through today's program. And in just a minute, we'll hear a brief overview of the draft climate action framework from Frank Kohlasch, who is the climate director at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency and has been instrumental in getting us to this point in the draft framework. And then we're going to hear from a panel of representatives from the Governor's Advisory Council, as well as Subcabinet members and the EQB about the future of climate action in Minnesota. And then we really want to hear from you. We want to know what you'd like to see included in the framework and what ideas you have for promoting collaboration on climate action. So during today's conversation, there are 2 ways you can participate. Throughout the event, we will use an online tool called Slido. So you can connect to Slido using your mobile phone, a tablet, a second computer screen, And you can log in and respond to surveys and submit questions for our panel. And so we're gonna try that out in a moment. And in the second half of the meeting, you'll have the opportunity to speak by unmuting yourself in the WebEx, and we'll explain the logistics of how that'll work. But we'll have really excellent support from Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, who was helping unmute and make sure that people's mics were working just now. And she will be helping provide technical support as we get to that part in the agenda. So at this point, we want to make sure that you are thinking about what you want to see captured in the framework, and what is the biggest opportunity for collaboration on climate action. So we're going to put those questions in the chat, and we want you to be thinking about those as you hear from Frank, as you hear from the panelists, as others are asking questions, because I think these are high level themes that we need to make sure that we're all connecting. So as you participate in the meeting, think about, what do you want captured? Where do we have opportunities for collaboration? And I'll just ask that you keep your comments and questions relevant to the topic at hand. We're trying to foster a respectful dialogue here. So at this point, we're going to try out this Slido tool. So we invite you to join the conversation at slido.com #climate. And you can do that using the QR code on the screen, as well as or going to the website. So for the first Slido survey, we want to learn more about all of you who have joined us today. So make sure you visit slido.com, enter the code climate, or use the QR code, and take a couple of minutes to answer the questions. So the first one is, where are you joining us from? And what is one value you bring to this discussion today? So we're going to give a question, or give some time here for people to answer those questions, recognizing that we're asking people to operate on multiple devices. And I think we're going to get the results of the first one in a word cloud. So as those are populated, you will see them on the screen. All right, so we've got the results of the results coming in is where you're joining us from. It appears that we've got a healthy distribution of people from the metro as well as greater Minnesota, which is excellent. That's what we want to see. We want this dialogue and the framework to represent all of us across the state. And then this one, you will just have to read it as they go. What perspectives do you bring to climate work? Appreciate all of these themes. It just speaks to the breadth of this, and that it touches all aspects of our life, and wanting to make sure that we are holistic in our considerations. All right, so we will also make sure that we can find a way to report all of this out, because you can't see all of this at the same time. But appreciate your responses, as well as using the tool and your technology nimbleness with us this afternoon. And at this point, we're going to hear some remarks from Governor Walz. He was unfortunately able to join us live. His schedule is very busy today, but he is committed to this work and has recorded some remarks for us in advance.
Hello, Governor Tim Walz here. Thank you for taking time to join us to talk about how Minnesotans can address climate change. I also want to thank the members of our Climate Change Subcabinet for the work to draft a statewide climate action framework. This framework recognizes the challenges and the opportunities climate change presents for our state. You don't have to look very far to see the impact that climate change is having on Minnesota. From wildfires to a shortened lake ice season, the signs are literally everywhere. And we know these impacts will only get worse. Let's seize this opportunity to create jobs, improve our health, and create a more equitable Minnesota for everyone. And luckily for us, Minnesotans have always excelled at transforming needs into opportunity. And this challenge calls on all of us to demonstrate that spirit of innovation once again. We know the steps forward, and our climate action framework will lay the foundation for generations of Minnesotans to be safe and included. But for this framework to be successful, it must reflect the real experiences and aspirations of all Minnesotans. That's why I'm looking forward to finishing and acting on this framework in a continued collaboration with each and every one of you. Thank you for all you do for Minnesota.
Great. So shortly, I'm going to turn it over to Frank Kohlasch to give an overview of the draft framework. But first, I just want to share a little bit more about how we're going to run the panel discussion. We'll have questions that will be posed to panel members, advisory council members, or members of the subcabinet or EQB leaders. And they have been inspired by question themes that we have collected through input on the framework via social media or other outlets. But in addition to those questions, if time allows, we will address questions that you submit via Slido. So again, asking you to keep that tool open and handy, and please consider asking a question that is relevant to this audience. So you can submit the questions via Slido from now until the panel and through the panel. And if your questions aren't answered today, we will respond to the question themes online using the engagement website that we have set up for the framework. So at this point, I'm happy to hand it over to Frank Kohlasch, who again is the Climate Director at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, to provide an overview of the draft framework.
Thank you, Commissioner Kessler, and thank you to everyone attending today's meeting. And as Commissioner Kessler mentioned, my name is Frank Kohlasch. I use he, him pronouns, and I will be giving an overview of the draft climate action framework. But I also want to recognize that many hands and many minds went into the creation of this draft framework, both within the Climate Change Subcabinet, the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change, and our partners outside of state agencies. So if you advance to the next slide, I will start with explaining why we decided to develop the framework. We heard from people within state agencies and outside of state government that they really wanted a clearer statement of the work that we want to accomplish together. The framework helps us organize our work and our thinking, and then share that thinking with Minnesotans. Developing and then publishing the draft framework invites conversations like the ones we're having today. I want to be clear, the framework isn't final. We wanted to publish ideas and give people something to respond to and discuss that we can build together. We hope the framework will serve as a tool for accountability for our future work. We're planning to build a review and update process that will allow us to check in on what we've accomplished and what we still have to do. Finally, we hope the framework will serve as a catalyst for action across all sectors. Ultimately, that's what we need: action on climate change. And the state agencies and advisory council cannot do it alone. We hope that others can see themselves in the document, and we'll see how they can help work towards our vision. And in particular, the framework answers the questions: what needs to be done? Next slide, please. One particular dynamic of the framework is that it accomplishes three things. It sets a vision for how Minnesota will address and prepare for climate change. It broadly describes the work that we need to accomplish together, and then it narrows to specific immediate near-term actions to support our long-term goals. It's important to emphasize the framework identifies immediate near-term actions that will lay an important foundation for future success. It does not identify everything we must do to achieve our Next Generation Energy Act goals or the IPPC goals, or build on the resiliency that we need, but rather it is an ambitious but reasonable set of near-term steps. Next slide, please. So establishing the vision within the framework is that Minnesota will be carbon neutral, resilient, and equitable. In the context of the framework, we mean carbon neutral. Minnesota substantially reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and any remaining greenhouse gases released are balanced by an equal amount being removed, stored, or sequestered. Resilient. Minnesota communities, businesses, and natural environment can prepare and respond to and recover from the impacts of climate change. And equitable. acknowledging and addressing disproportionate impacts of climate change and their roots in past and present systems, ensuring fair distribution of the costs and benefits of climate action, including to future generations, and ensuring meaningful participation in the planning process. It's important to acknowledge that the impacts of our changing climate are not experienced the same way by all Minnesotans throughout the state. Climate change is yet another lens where inequalities are being laid bare and which demands critical and immediate action if we are truly to be a state where all families can thrive, not just some. Those who are already vulnerable due to a range of social, economic, historical, and political factors have less ability to prepare for, cope with, and recover from climate change impacts. These factors also mean that they are often on the front lines of climate change impacts, whether it is flooding, heat, or access to fish and wildlife for subsistence. We also want to recognize our work with tribal government partners to enhance our coordination and collaboration with them on the early drafts. We wanted to ensure that we learned from their knowledge, experiences, challenges, and successes. Next slide, please. The framework itself is organized into 6 chapters and with 6 particular goal areas. They are the clean transportation sector, the climate smart and natural and working lands sector, resilient communities, clean energy and efficient buildings, healthy lives and communities, and a clean economy. Next slide, please. Within each of those sections, each chapter outlines the key challenges within that section, identifies a vision for the future within that section, provides a basic context for those people who are not working in this particular area on a day-to-day basis. It broadly characterizes the body of work we need to accomplish, identifies the state priority actions, and then identifies initial measures of success about how we will know if we are making progress in that sector. Beyond the body of the framework, we have other supplementary materials available. Appendix 1 includes all of the proposed state actions. Appendix 2 provides a greenhouse gas analysis of the actions that were identified. We have a glossary, and then we have a 2-page summary, a tool for sharing the basics of the framework without sharing the entirety of the full framework itself. Next slide, please. Addressing the impacts of climate change presents us with a historical opportunity to strengthen our economy, improve our health, and create a more equitable Minnesota for everyone. In each chapter, we talk about equity and how it relates specifically to that sector, current inequalities being experienced today, their historical context, and what are some of the key things that might be done to address those inequities as we work to address climate change. As I mentioned before, we all have a role to play in climate change. The state or any single actor cannot do it alone. In this part of the framework, we highlight key partnerships and opportunities for businesses, other governments, and individuals to take action. And as we think about our priorities for climate action, we also want to think about what co-benefits there are for acting. In each chapter, we highlight some key co-benefits, be they soil health, water quality, air quality, cleaner jobs, healthier and more resilient communities. With that, I will turn the microphone back over to Commissioner Kessler to progress with the rest of the meeting.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks for the overview. So hopefully that seeded your brain cells and inspired you to think of some questions. Again, we encourage you to enter your questions into Slido. And Frank's going to share a link of the draft framework in the chat so that you can, or we will share a link to the draft framework in the chat so you can see it in its entirety and peruse all the sections, including the appendices, at your leisure. But at this point, we're going to move to the panel discussion, which is focused on perspectives of the future of climate change action in Minnesota. And I appreciate Commissioner Stroman of the DNR leading this discussion. And at this point, I will turn it over to Commissioner Stroman.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Kessler, and thanks for all the folks joining us here today. I'm really excited for this next portion. For about the next 40 minutes, we will hear from a panel of members of the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change, the Climate Change Subcabinet, and the EQB. And the purpose of this panel is to hear perspectives on the climate action framework from some of the people involved in drafting it. So I get the pleasure of asking panelists about the thinking behind the framework, their hopes for collaboration, and what excites them about the future of climate action in Minnesota. We really hope that this kind of behind the scenes tour into some of the thinking behind the climate action framework, we'll seed more public questions and discussion following the panel. I do want to give a special welcome to the following Climate Advisory Council members who are joining the panel. As we mentioned before, the Advisory Council was appointed by the governor to help identify barriers as well as opportunities for climate action in Minnesota and to promote equity and a just transition. So with us for this panel, we have Dr. Lucinda Johnson from the Natural Resources Research Institute at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. We have Ann Schwegerl from Prairie Point Farms, Hilda Martinez Salgado, an environment and climate consultant, and Marco Hernandez from Tending the Soil Coalition. So I do have a few questions queued up for the panel, some of which were informed by questions collected from the public via social media prior to today's session. We'll also try to get to the questions collected in Slido as time allows. So this is my last plug for making sure you visit the Slido site and get those questions in there. I am going to direct questions to specific panelists because we do want to hear from some specific perspectives on this panel. But I also want to remind our panel members that we do want this to be a conversational portion of the session today. So I do invite you to go ahead and speak up as needed. I will remind you, we have a pretty short time, however, a lot of folks on the panel. So I'll remind you to please keep your comments brief. I don't want to have to give anyone the hook as we're going through this. And I will also add that if you're not asked to respond to a question and you don't feel like you need to go ahead and speak up, you can chat out through the WebEx chat feature a brief response to enrich the conversation and share more perspectives here today. So my hope is that this will be a really dynamic conversation between the verbal discussion with the panelists as well as the panelists discussing in the chat. So with that said, we will get started. And the first question I'm going to direct to Advisory Council Member Martinez, Commissioner Arnold, Director Jaschke, and Advisory Council Member Dr. Johnson. And the question is, if you could talk a little bit, each of you, what motivates you in your work on the climate action framework, and what are your hopes for climate action in Minnesota? And maybe Advisory Council Member Martinez, we can start with you.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Stallman, for the invitation. I think I have to say it's a pleasure to be here. So what motivates me to be my work in the climate action framework? I have to say there are two reasons that motivates me. The first one is to have this opportunity to make a difference, to be able to share my years of experience and expertise. I've been working in the development of public policies in with a special focus on transportation, urban development, and energy. So to be able to be part of this process, to make, to be able to build a systematic transformation that will not only help the reduce greenhouse gases, but will also bring us to a more sustainable development path is one of the main motives. And the other one is a more personal motive. You know, I have two teenagers, so there isn't a day that I don't wake up and think about the future they're gonna have. So I think we don't owe it to future generation. I think we owe it to the current children and youth generations to do whatever is possible from our side to act on climate. So throughout my work or through this participatory process, I try to bring whatever is on my side to try to reduce greenhouse gases and to move to a more sustainable path. And my hopes are, they have to do with what is happening now with the climate action framework. Like, I'm really excited about this engagement that is happening with different actors and stakeholders, like to have them on the table and listen to their perspective and what they need and what they think about what is in the framework and what it's missing. I think that gives me hope because I think they can own the process and not only and then like help in its implementation in the future. That will be my take. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's move to Commissioner Arnold, and then I've actually learned that unfortunately Director Jaschke is not able to be with us this afternoon. So we'll go to Commissioner Arnold and then to Advisory Council member Dr. Lucinda Johnson.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman, and thank you all for joining today. I have sort of the same two-pronged answer that that Hilda had. So, you know, from a personal perspective, my family has farmed the same land for just over 200 years now, and really core to that has been sort of a stewardship of that land and thinking about ways that we can, you know, I think my grandma is just about to turn 93, and her sort of core thought is how to make sure that my kids and my kids' kids still know that that's sort of a thing that they're tied to. And so whether that's experimenting with no-till planting or in the 80s, which was a little wild then, but you know, we did that, to putting some of the land in CRP, and now my cousins are farming on a much smaller scale, and they're thinking about putting portions of it into solar and, as my grandma says, resting the land from the working nature that it has right now. So, you know, I have a lot of kind of personal connection to the topics that I get to interact with on a professional level through this group, and then in my responsibilities as commissioner. From a sort of commerce perspective, my hope is that with the climate action framework, we can really build on the success we've had in the clean energy sector. You know, Minnesota's long been a clean energy leader. We've created a ton of new jobs and have expanded the clean energy economy here. And so building on that, I think, is just a huge opportunity. I think for a next step, thinking about retrofitting our older buildings and thinking about the building sector is really important. There are homes and businesses that have an opportunity to use less energy, lower emissions, and be more resilient to extreme weather. And that's a really big benefit, but also helps to grow the economy because you need people who can do all of that work. And so, you know, that to me is really motivating and I think is really a good opportunity. I'll also say that we need to share the benefits of the clean economy equitably throughout the state. I'm glad that Frank really highlighted that focus in the climate action framework. And we can really continue to work together to think about forward-looking energy policies that strengthen the economy and support equitable and resilient, an equitable and resilient kind of economy that's, you know, that is healthier for everyone and cleaner.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Arnold. Dr. Johnson, do you want to share your thoughts on that question about what motivates you in your work on the framework and what your hopes are for climate action in Minnesota?
Certainly, thank you for the invitation, and I'm really excited about being able to participate in this advisory committee and in the development of the action framework for several reasons. The first is at a professional level. I'm the Director of Research at the Natural Resources Research Institute, which is up at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. And being able to participate in this activity provides me with multiple perspectives that include both the academic all the way through multiple practitioners and community-based individuals that help me to inform and guide the research agenda for the NRRI in the area of both climate resilience and other kinds of research-based or solution-based research. So from a personal perspective, having so many different having access to so many different perspectives really enriches the ability to inform our research agenda. From the perspective of my hopes for the climate action in Minnesota, over the years, I have been talking about climate change at large scales all the way to, for instance, across the Great Lakes Basin, all the way to the state level. And what I realize is that solutions need to be multi-pronged. We need to be thinking about things that government can do, what local governments can do, to all the way down to smaller organizations and individuals. So the action framework includes many different solutions that can be implemented at multiple scales. And that is incredibly important to get individuals engaged in the conversation to make the actions relevant to their life experience and the kind of work and actions that they think about on a day-to-day basis. So the focus on time-sensitive solutions is really, really important, although we cannot lose sight of the big picture and the long time frame that we will necessarily have to incorporate into our thinking if we're going to be successful in bringing down the carbon emissions to the levels that are needed. So I will leave it at that, and thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Thanks to all the panelists for sharing your thoughts. And Dr. Johnson, I just want to pause on your thought there about the importance of engaging people and making both understanding the challenges and the potential actions and solutions relevant to people. And I'm struck because every one of our panelists talked about motivation as both a professional and a personal perspective. And so I think that's notable, right? Nobody is doing this work simply because it is their job. There is a personal motivation. So those personal connections, those connections to people are clearly an important thread here. And just with that, again, I'm going to move on to the next question, but I would invite any others here to share your motivations, whether they be personal or professional, and your hopes for climate action in the chat if that question wasn't directed to you. This next question I'm going to direct, just so folks are aware, to Advisory Council Member Ann Schweigel, Advisory Council Member Marco Hernandez, and Chair Zelli. And the question is, many of you are connected, all of you are connected to wide networks. How do we build bridges across communities and sectors in Minnesota to reach our climate goals? And Ann, maybe we could start with you on that question.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Starwin, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm excited to talk all things climate action. I'm Ann Schweigel. I'm a farmer in western Minnesota. I'm a grain farmer out here, and I work with Minnesota Farmers Union, and I serve as their vice president. As far as kind of reaching our networks, I serve as our vice president of the state of Minnesota Farmers Union General Farm Organization. We have members who have farms of a half acre up to a couple thousand acres or several thousand acres. So farms of all size. And, painting with a fairly broad brush here, farmers are pretty independently minded. Most of them are self-employed. So kind of in my experience working with organizing farmers with Farmers Union, is that kind of that peer-to-peer networking really lands best, right? You're learning from your neighbors, fellow farmers on best practices, just like farms near the Twin Cities look a lot different than farms in Southwest Minnesota, which look a lot different than farms in the Red River Valley. It's hard to say a one size fits all for everyone in production agriculture, for everyone's farm. So kind of taking that smaller on the ground organizing has shown to be really helpful and proven to get kind of people to buy in to the message that you're hearing instead of it being brought down from on high. That's where I kind of see there being progress around climate action.
Great, thank you. Advisory Council Member Marco Hernandez, you want to share some thoughts on building networks?
Yeah, for sure. No, thank you, Sarah. Well, definitely when it comes to this question, even as the policy director for Tending the Soil, which is a coalition, all the organizations are in the chat, so I won't say them due to time. And they're all connected to not only their community, these 6 organizations are all BIPOC led, and also the majority of the members are Black, Indigenous, and people of color too. I guess how I'll start with is that what's important to always keep in mind, especially hearing from community, and I heard this straight from a community member, is that any environmental policy or proposal that does not include environmental justice or equity will only perpetuate environmental racism and green gentrification. And so what I'm really happy what we did with the climate framework is that with each section, you'll see once the draft is out, or if it is out and you saw it, that each section also includes equity and touches on environmental justice as well. So that is super important. But in order to really bridge with these different communities in which, with the pandemic, it has shown a light, especially on the discriminations that are faced by BIPOC and frontline communities. And so what's really important is that there definitely needs to be a timeline that when it comes to implementation. We also need to have enforcement mechanisms to all these things as well, because from what I hear from communities that, they're tired of just hearing, the nice words that are coming from the state or their elected officials that doesn't have the full force of enforcement behind them and funding as well. And so I think it's going to take some time to build that trust and to build those bridges. But I think what's left after we come out with this climate framework is to work on those different mechanisms to show community that we are serious. And so I'm really happy to continue working with these wonderful folks from the Subcabinet, as well as the Governor's Advisory Council on Climate Change, to continue doing that work and to prove to community that we will implement these with BIPOC and frontline communities in mind.
Thank you very much. Chair Zelli, do you want to share some thoughts on how we build bridges across communities? Something I know you do every day in your role.
Thank you, Sarah. We do, not just across state agencies, but local governments, community organizations, employers. We think about Met Council as fundamentally a planning and research organization, and yet we're a government that does central planning, and we operate transit, we operate wastewater. And think about transportation, the #1 emitter of carbon. The fact that we are building a robust, interconnected network of transit, it can't be done by us alone. This is the local governments, it's the planning, it's the funding, and it's the driving people to alternatives away from a single occupied car, and to kind of follow up on Marco's thought, to actually provide access to those that have been marginalized and most affected by climate. We think about the work we're doing with 180 different municipalities around the metro area. Many of them, most of them don't have staff to do some of the technical work for climate resiliency. And so our staff really does hands-on workshops and conversations, technical support, and actually grants. So, partnership is key. And in fact, we're not going to make any of our regional goals, our state goals, without kind of having that coordinated work together. So the Subclimate and the framework has really made a difference.
Great, thank you so much. And I don't think anyone on this panel would disagree at how important those networks and those partnerships and those opportunities for collaboration are. I will just again remind folks, if anybody else wants to share thoughts in the chat on any of these questions, please feel free. We can get a little bit of conversation going between the chat and the verbal responses here from the panel. I do want to switch to a question that we received through social media before the event. And the question is, how can we capture water from less frequent and more intense rainfalls to support, I don't know if they meant more frequent and more intense rainfalls, to support agriculture in times of drought, as well as reduce stormwater runoff? And Commissioner Kessler, I think I'll start with you, and then Advisory Council member Schweigerl, if you want to add a thought from your perspective on agriculture, that'd be great as well.
Happy to weigh in here. Thanks, Commissioner Stroman. And I appreciate the question because, as we all know, Minnesota is experiencing more frequent and intense rainfall events because of climate change. And this is not something that you have to be a climate scientist to experience. I think you just have to be a human being in Minnesota. We know that the rainfalls have negative impacts on agriculture, landscapes, as well as our built infrastructure. And they also impact stream banks and aquatic life. So it's important to think not only about climate impacts, but water quality. I think I like to wear multiple hats when I think about this. And to that end, there are multiple agencies working on thinking about building resilience and how to adapt both in our natural and working lands and in our urban landscapes, and thinking about water infrastructure that is more resilient to the impacts of these intense and frequent rain events. And I'll just channel my John Jaski, Director of the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and note that last year the legislature allocated $2 million to the Board of Water and Soil Resources to develop a water storage program to think about our runoff in the agricultural sector and in our natural or our working lands, and in our farming communities. And Bowser, or the Board of Water and Soil Resources, has developed that program, and it now is asking for additional funds as a part of this ongoing session and in the administration's supplemental budget requests. And that I'll connect it to the framework and say that in the specifically in the framework, I think it's section or initiative 2.4, there's a section called Climate Smart Natural and Working Lands. And that goal actually focuses on supporting sustainable landscapes and water practices. So thinking about not only crops that we're growing for food, but also native vegetation and perennial crops that help the soil. They can be food, they improve water quality, and they keep water and nutrients in place. So thinking about where we can get stacked benefits when we talk about natural water management solutions is something that I think is really exciting and is included in the framework. But I would defer to Anne, who is an expert in like how this works in the real world.
I won't by any means call myself an expert, other than, kind of what our philosophy is on our operation. Resiliency to me means spreading out risk. And so a lot of the things that we're doing to make ourselves both climate resilient are also helping to spread out our risk on our operation. And I've been farming about 10 years now, and a couple of those earlier years we had 4-inch rains in early July that really wiped out a good portion of our cash crops. 4-inch rains that came one right after another, right around the 4th of July, which was pretty devastating for us. And so the things that we do are all to try and build up our ability for our soil to act like a sponge, right? So when we do get those rains, it can soak it up instead of just running straight off and taking the nutrients that we put down with it. And also then holding that water for when we then almost invariably hit July and August and September and it goes bone dry. So kind of to be able to carry our crops through till harvest season. One of the several things that we're doing to try and mitigate that risk, make our farm more resilient, is to keep building up the amount of time that we have a living cover on our soil. So whether we're doing that through the use of cover crops, following our cool season crops, things that get harvested in July, and then the soil would otherwise lay bare until the next spring. We're putting on cover crops to kind of keep building up that soil organic matter. And then also planting perennial crops. So we are Kernza growers, and Kernza is a perennial grain crop. So a crop that can both be like super great for soil health and water quality, and is a food crop that people can eat. So those stacked benefits that you were referring to before, Commissioner Kessler, are something that we really think about a lot on our operation.
Great, thank you. And I want to say thanks to Commissioner Daubenberger and Advisory Council Member Johnson for getting that chat conversation going. It's great to see some additional conversation there. To the same question on how we capture water, I'm wondering if Commissioner Peterson, you might have something to add from the Department of Ag perspective.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think that was, summed up pretty well and really appreciate it. I think we look at a lot of different options. Some of the things that we look at in our drought type situation is obviously supporting different tillage type systems, cover cropping. Our Minnesota Ag Water Quality Certification Program really encourages a lot of that, really helps grow a lot of that, and then different structures for holding water. At the Department of Agriculture, we also use our Ag BMP loan program that helps with those water and conservation projects as well as tillage equipment. And so I think there's exciting things happening on that. I think water storage is really is a buzzword right now, which is really good. That in the 60s, we built a lot of water storage structures. We learned, and then we kind of got away from it. But with the water issues and things that we've been having, I think a lot of people are re-looking at that. And I know people don't like to always talk about tiling and like to demonize tiling, but there's a lot of advances in tiling. We think of tiling as being tiling from 100 years ago. It's really not. There's really been a lot of advances in that. And there's things that we can maybe do there too, as well as using other things that help hold the water in the soil. So it's a great discussion and something that we're going to have to keep working on with our changing climate. Just one other point, we went to a drought this last year, but 2019, we had the wettest year on record. And, Southwest Minnesota, we had over 1 million acres that didn't get planted. So that just highlights, the extremes that we're in right now for agriculture.
Thank you, Commissioner, for adding those thoughts. I know we're getting a number of questions in Slido, so let's move to some of those questions. I'm going to ask Faith Krogstad from the Environmental Quality Board to come on. And Faith, if you could give us a question from Slido, that would be great.
Sure, Commissioner Stroman. The top question that we've gotten so far is, why doesn't the framework address what we need to meet the IPPC goals if that is what is needed for survival?
Excellent question. I am maybe going to start with Director Pratt and Commissioner Kessler. Maybe one of you want to go kind of first and second on that, and then we'll invite any of the other leaders here if they want to share thoughts on that question.
Sure, I will be brief, and then we can hear from Director Pratt. I just really appreciate this question, and I think that want to say that the Climate Action Framework is a draft, and it's a starting point as acknowledged towards the state's goals, and that we are asking today and through this process for input on how and if we need to take action and revise the goals or to move in a slightly different direction. I think at its core, it lays a foundation towards a carbon neutral future. And I would personally, and I think all of us recognize that we need to take action. And I would point to not only the development of the framework as that foundational path, but to the budget that we put forward, recognizing that action is needed now. The administration has collectively more than 30 climate-related proposals across many of the agencies represented here, and it's almost $1 billion in requests, $900 million in requests. So we are really aiming at thinking about how these things are connected, the actions that we take to build healthier communities that also grow jobs and provide additional innovation opportunities across Minnesota's landscapes, and that we need to be supporting planning and small businesses and capital investments in municipalities. And those ideas are all reflected in our budget proposal. And we need to do a lot more. And so this is a starting point, and recognize that we are not going to get this done as state agencies. So appreciate not only your advocacy, but also your partnership in this. And we are only going to do this better together. So with that, I will turn it over to Director Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Kessler. And I'll just build on what you're saying. I agree with your points, and I also appreciate this question. And, I want to emphasize that this framework is not meant in any way to constrain our thinking. This is a starting point for that collaboration. We can be as ambitious and bold as we can all be together. One of the things when the Climate Subcabinet got together and was thinking about the approach of this framework very early on, we tried to learn from past history, right? One of the things we've done in the past is we've built plans, we've built, roadmaps and guidelines that have fallen short of being implemented and acted on. And that's because we didn't have enough coalition, we didn't have enough momentum, we didn't have enough Minnesotans and other sectors along in the journey with us. And so that's what we're trying to do a little bit differently with this framework. Yes, it doesn't map out every single action. It doesn't map out every single science-based and evidence-based approach that we're going to need to take. We do need to do that work still. That is very important. But we need to do it with all of you. We need to do it with some of the communities and underrepresented voices who haven't been at the table. We need to do it with people who don't necessarily at this moment picture themselves in the work. We need to bring them with us. And so that's where this is coming from. Again, we don't see this as an either or. It's not this framework over here. It's not this, and that means we can't do the modeling that we need to do to get to the IPPC goals. We need that too. So that's my answer there. But I would invite other colleagues on this call and advisory council members and EQB public members. If anyone else wants to answer this question, I'll open it up. I think it's a really important question.
Yeah, thanks for that, Director Pratt. I want to make sure that we've had perspectives from you and Commissioner Kessler, both sit on the EQB and the Climate Subcabinet, and certainly have an agency perspective. It would be great if we have members from the advisory council who want to share thoughts, or some of the public members from the EQB, so we get kind of a perspective that is outside of the agencies. If anyone wants to volunteer or put something in the chat.
Yeah,
Great.
can I? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes.
So, yeah, I just want to build on what Katrina and Katie were saying. I really do think that this process is a little bit different. I think because I'm seeing it with what is currently happening, like with these working groups that they are taking place, and they try to invite the different stakeholders for each of them, so we can hear their perspective and see if they think there's something missing there. Or there is something more ambitious that needs to be there. So I guess we're setting the foundation, and we hope that this discussion can help out and build something that allows us to eventually fulfill the goals that are set in the Next Generation Energy Act.
Thank you for adding that perspective. Anyone else? One of our leaders here want to share a thought on that question? All right, well, feel free to put something in the chat. I know we have more questions. So Faith, do you want to share another question with us from Slido?
Absolutely. So the next question at the top that has been voted up is, how will we actually set and measure short-term goals? Given the failure to meet 2005 goals, what continuous improvement metrics will assure we are serious?
That's a great question. And I know we have a lot of folks on this call who are very interested in goals and metrics and measurements. So let's see, maybe, I don't know, Commissioner Arnold, do you want to maybe take a first stab at this, and then we'll invite others to chime in?
Sure. I think, Commissioner Kessler talked about how this is this is a framework and this is a place for feedback. And so I think that, giving feedback is a great, this is sort of the purpose in trying to look at where we might want to go. To me, having metrics is really important. And we've seen on the energy side, measuring, we have a somewhat I don't want to say easy, but we are looking at decarbonization in the energy sector, and we can see, I love the graph that just watches it fall, and we're not where we need to be, but it's progress, and then we can kind of keep measuring against that. So, I think the places where we can have good metrics and can measure against, we have the Next Generation Energy Act, and I see a number of comments that, we're not meeting those goals, but continuing to focus and think about, right, what's the next step? What's the next step? What's the next step? I think will help us to get there. So, I'm sure others have, slightly different ways of thinking about it, depending on your program operations or your, the sort of responsibility, but that's the way that I think about it.
You're muted, Commissioner Stroman. I can add, while you're in meeting, I can just add that, one of the things I think that's come up in developing the framework is, it has multiple sectors called out in the framework, and in some places we have robust data and we have numbers where we can measure and we can really actively see what progress we're making. In other places, those numbers are a little bit more challenging, and some of the data is harder to tease apart. I'm working with a working group looking at healthy communities and equity, and we are having robust conversations about, just how do we measure that? How do we know we're making progress, especially when the data about health and the information we have on health is really intertwined with a lot of other social dynamics that are going on. And so I think we have a lot of room to work on this. And again, it's going to take universities coming to the table. It's going to take our smart scientists at the state. It's going to take advancements in data. So I think we need to continue, and that's why this framework, as my colleague Frank Kohlasch mentioned in his introduction, this is not just a one and done framework. This is learning, an adaptive learning process where we publish the framework, but we return to it as we have learned more and as we get more robust data and measurement systems in place. And again, with input from all of Minnesotans, so they can say, here's how we can help measure this and hold ourselves accountable.
I realize that I've already spoken quite a bit, but I will just add like a plug for people to tell us if they have ideas for metrics, because we have put some out there in the draft and they are very draft. And even in the beginnings of this engagement process with the stakeholder groups, the one that I am participating in around resilient communities, we've already heard really good feedback around the draft metric about increasing and maintaining the tree canopy. And from a local municipality standpoint, how are we considering invasive species and emerald ash borer when we put those metrics together? So what's in there is only going to get better with all of your ideas included and all of your perspectives. So I encourage you to look at the draft metrics, because we do recognize we need to have something that we're measuring and hold ourselves collectively accountable. But what that is and what those metrics look like is very much open for discussion and part of this process.
Thank you. All right, well, again, others can feel free to put thoughts in the chat. I do want to move to another question that we received from social media prior to this event, and it's about the importance of addressing and mitigating urban heat island effect. And I'm wondering if Commissioner Dan Huff from Department of Health, if you could talk a little bit about why mitigating the urban heat island effect is so important from a health standpoint, and then Chair Zelli, if you could talk a little bit about Met Council's perspective on that question.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman, for the question. So we know that one of the health impacts, the human health impacts of climate change, is heat stress. We, have read the stories of often in cities, Chicago, New York, other cities around the world, where we have these extreme heat days, and especially when we don't have any cooling at night, so it just stays hot for days and nights on end. We have folks who are medically fragile or vulnerable, will die from the heat stress. So we see that this is concentrated in our urban areas, and that heat island where, you know, all of that, all of those surfaces, whether they be pavement or house roofs or whatever, just absorb that heat and radiate. We have less forest cover, less tree canopy, so we don't have as much of the cooling from the evapotranspiration. And it does a number of things for human health. One is it higher temperatures, you're going to get more creation of ground level ozone. Sorry, my dog has a squeaky toy in the background here. We have you know, sort of supercharge our ragweed and other pollinating producing plants that are going to, you know, help exacerbate just allergies, but also our asthma triggers. And then the heat itself can be deadly. So from a human health perspective, addressing not only climate change, but heat islands in particular is definitely something we need to look at.
Thank you. Chair Zelli, I know this is an issue that you have to deal with at Met Council, so I'm curious about your thoughts on what we can do to mitigate the urban heat island effect, to avoid some of those health impacts that Commissioner Huff was just talking about.
Well, thanks, Sarah. And it is near and dear to my heart. And just to follow up on Dan's point that it is a health issue, it's a health crisis. And I invite everybody to go to the Metropolitan Council website. There is a kind of an extreme heat map that you can find real data and really drill into your block and see kind of where those heat islands are around the whole metro area. And we keep updating that, and it really shows the challenge. And I think the short answer is what Commissioner Kessler had said. It's about tree canopy. I mean, that's the one program on a municipal, on a park basis can make a difference. And we know that there's a huge tree inequity. I mean, if you look at that heat map, you'll see there's parts of the core cities, parts around the metro, where those that are most marginalized also have severe heat. And you can really follow it, not just from the parks and the lakes, of course, but really the tree canopy in the residential and commercial cores. And that's why we think that picking up on this idea of goals, and you know, we really are developing the muscles, the tools in order to absolutely can be committed to tree canopies, which not only provide shade, reduce temperatures, but they also help retain some of these rainfalls that we're just been describing. You know, get it into the groundwater. So there's multiple benefits. The issue is this is not a voluntary kind of activity alone. And we working a lot with cities like Woodbury, Minneapolis Park Board, a group called Green Minneapolis, kind of developing ways to fund and to kind of sustain more tree planting, and not just to expand, but to keep up and find those areas that have been without trees. And I think that one of the tools we've developed is called Growing Shade, which is again in our website, and that's a planning tool that local communities, municipalities can use to help develop a longer term again, those metrics and ways to develop incentives really on a local basis to to see what the results are. And I think that tool is great because it doesn't just map real-time conditions like our heat map. It actually shows under different filters what difference we could make. And issues like environmental justice really become pronounced when you kind of see it in that framework. So I think tree canopy is a huge solution and right in front of us in our area to address.
Great, thank you. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our community relief tree grant programs that come through the DNR. So we're hoping that, you know, that actually will receive some funding maybe this year, from additional funding from the legislature to keep working on that action. So Thank you for those responses. I know we are running short of time for this panel section, but there are still many questions from Slido. We won't be able to get to all of them, and I do want to let folks know that we will answer questions in the online engagement tool and find a way to get folks answers to those. But I think we are going to squeeze in one more question from Slido. So Faith, if I can have you read one more question, that would be great.
Sure, Commissioner Stroman. The next question is, how will our state agencies bring this framework into their permitting decisions? Will agencies require all new projects to be consistent with this framework?
That's a great question. And, we probably could extend the question both to thinking about permitting as well as the environmental review and maybe an opportunity to talk about some of the things that the EQB has been discussing. So Commissioner Kessler, I see you're probably ready to respond to some of those permitting questions, and then certainly Director Pratt or others from the EQB, if you want to talk about some of the work we're doing to think about climate in the environmental review process as well.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Stroman, for connecting those two, because I will say that environmental review is the critical foundational piece that informs permitting. So for new and expanding projects, environmental review, which both Commissioner Stroman and Director Pratt can speak to considerations and greenhouse gases and environmental review, will help the permitting agencies, whether that's the MPCA many times or sometimes it's the DNR, to develop permits that reflect the impacts that have been discovered and discussed in the environmental review process. And certainly there are examples of permits where we have considered climate mitigation, and I'll point to the very close nexus between resilience, adaptation, soil health, and water quality, as well as sequestering carbon, and in many cases, goals that are necessary to meet our Clean Water Act requirements are also goals that will help towards our climate action framework. In as much as this sets a regulatory framework, I don't think we are saying that, but I think it is setting goals that the state will consider within our regulatory authorities now. And as much as we can incorporate, we will be doing that. And then where we need additional authorities, I think this framework and these conversations will help us understand if that's something we need to explore. So I think the answer is yes, where we have authorities, and where we don't, it will inform us on how we continue to advocate for additional authorities. And I will just reiterate that I do think there's a lot of stacked benefits that our regulatory programs are already pursuing that help meet climate goals ongoing.
Yeah, and I can add, the Environmental Quality Board, as some of you are aware, and I think it was Amelia Voss who answered this or asked this question on Slido, and I know Amelia is very familiar with EQB's work on environmental review, and we are right now actively piloting a new version, an updated version of the environmental assessment worksheet that has information about climate adaptation and about greenhouse gas emissions on that worksheet, and we're working on that. But to the broader question of aligning our regulatory systems with the goals of the framework, absolutely, I think that's part of the work to come. I think one of the challenges, one of the challenges that I observed from where I sit, and I've been listening to legislative hearings this week where there's been a lot of discussions about permitting timelines and environmental review and the consequences that some people feel about those guidelines and timelines. And so what my message is there is we're not all on the same page about Minnesotans about where we need to head and how we need to align these processes. And we will get stuck if we can't figure out how to get there together. It's not as simple always as just changing a policy or changing a permitting or environmental review process. We we need people aligned and willing to do that. And so, I think there's a lot of room and a lot of work and a lot of hard work and collaborative work that needs to happen to align with the framework.
Thank you. No, we are running short on time. I will just see if there is anyone else that had a burning thought they wanted to share on that question. Commissioner Doppelberger, looks like your hand is up.
Sure. Yes, I'm not sure it's burning, but just thought maybe I would add in regards to permitting and thinking about the environmental process. Just earlier in the chat, I mentioned our Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council that was created a few years ago for some long-term public engagement where we work with external stakeholders and identify strategies for achieving our state and agency climate goals. But as a part of that work, a recommendation that had come out was that we consider our goal of reducing vehicle miles traveled as a part of the environmental review process or the NEPA process. And so that's something that we're exploring how that could potentially be a part of that, whether it's VMT reduction or other goals that are coming to light as a part of the work we're doing with the stack. And then also with the permitting, when it comes to permitting activities in our highway right-of-way, just wanted to note that, yeah, we've been opening up our ideas, thoughts on other uses for the right-of-way, working with other state DOTs on that as well. In fact, having a peer exchange here very soon where we're hosting to get other ideas for that, but looking at the idea of, different uses to help us obtain our environmental goals. So just thought I'd add that to this discussion. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. Good to get some perspective from the transportation perspective in the conversation. So I think we need to wrap up the panel at this point so we can move to the next portion of the session today. Again, we will work to answer the questions that remain in Slido through our online engagement tool. I really want to thank all of the panelists and the leaders here today. I'm just struck by how much passion there is, how much expertise there is, how much willingness to engage in conversations about these really important issues there is. And we could probably have this conversation every week, and maybe we'd get a little bit farther faster. But just a wonderful exchange here this afternoon. So thank you very much, and thank you to members of the public who have submitted questions here. You've asked really good questions, and it's great to be able to hear difference of perspectives from folks who serve in agencies and sit on the climate subcabinet, to members of the advisory committee, to both agency and public members of the EQB. So thank you again. And with that, I'm going to pass over the microphone to EQB Director Katie Pratt for the next part of the event.
Thank you, Commissioner Stroman. Again, my name is Katie Pratt, Executive Director with EQB, and we're moving to the kind of final segment of our program here today, and this is really a chance for us to be quiet. By us, I mean the panelists and the folks who have been talking so far, and to hear from you all, to hear from the people who are joining us on this meeting today. We want to hear more about your experiences. How is this framework resonating with you? And in particular, we have two questions that we're really interested in. What would you want to make sure is captured in this framework? And I think we heard some questions in the last section that gave us some thoughts along those lines. But let's hear more about that. What do you want to make sure is captured in this framework? And then what is the biggest opportunity for collaboration on climate change? Again, we've been sharing kind of throughout today that one of the dilemmas we see is we need more people working on this across Minnesota, across different sectors, across different regions and areas of the state, and really pushing for this work together. And based on experiences that you all have had, what can make this successful? What can make this climate action framework have legs beyond the publication this summer? What will help move it forward? So there's two ways you can participate during this section. And I'll have the next slide, please. So one is we want to just hear your voices. So if you want to give a comment, an oral comment today, we welcome that. The way that you're going to do that is by raising your hand in WebEx, and there's a little hand raised feature that will show in a moment. You can raise your hand in WebEx, and we'll just take commenters in the order that they come in. So we'll unmute you and cue you up when it's time to do that. We do ask you, we'll see how many hands we have raised, but we do ask you to keep your comments concise, just so that we can benefit from hearing from the breadth of people that want to give comment today. You know, we're thinking around maybe 2 to 3 minutes for your comments. The other way is we have a Slido, another Slido interface open, a new one with those 2 questions I just had on the screen. So if you would prefer to just type in some comments, again, those are helpful. We will take those and take those experiences and read them through during the meeting and after the meeting as well. So that's another way you can participate. With that, I will just give people a minute. Let's see, next slide. I think we have there we go. So the hand raised feature, you can find your name in the participant list, and right next to your name, there is a little hand raised icon. And that is how you'll raise your hand. If you're joining via your phone, you'll look for 3 dots at the bottom of your screen. And when you click on that, there'll be a raise hand option. So that's how it's a little bit hard to find in this version of WebEx, but that's how you get to the hand raise feature. If you're having trouble, please chat at the host and they can help you as well. WebEx has a new way to raise your hand. I wasn't sure if everybody, so in the icon bar at the bottom of your screen, there's also a little hand raise. You can use that approach to raise your hand. The little hand raise in the bottom of your screen. So I'll give folks a minute here to just find that and go ahead and raise your hand. Again, we'd love to hear your voices. I know it's hard to speak up in this context, but we would love to just hear your experience. There's no right or wrong answer here, but we want to hear from Minnesotans. And I have Rebecca Gutierrez Moreno, who is going to be helping me queue up commenters. And let me just check. Rebecca, do we have any folks with their hand raised at this point?
Hi, Katie. Yes, we have Mr. Willis Madison with his hand raised.
Okay. Well, we'll turn it to Willis, and while he's giving comment, if other folks can chime in and raise their hand. This can be conversational if you want to respond to something the last commenter said, or respond to things, watch those comments coming in via Slido as well. And with that, Mr. Madison, you should be unmuted.
I'm trying to unmute Mr. Madison. Just give me 1 second. I am having a little bit of technical difficulty. Just give me 1 minute. I mean, not minute, second. Okay, Mr. Madison, you should be unmuted. Please go ahead. Mr. Madison, can you hear me?
We're not hearing you, Mr. Madison. It looks like you're unmuted, but we're not able to hear you.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Hello.
Hello.
We got you now. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry for the problem there. Willis Matson up here in Osage, Minnesota. I track closely both the IPCC's report and the UN's Biological Integrity Group, the IPPC. Each of them are laying out goals and timelines with which we must both reduce emissions to zero and then capture by natural capture primarily carbon from the atmosphere. What I would like to suggest, since the IPCC report will be coming out now in April that lays out specifically what strategies and what timing and what scale must be implemented to meet the goals, international goals. I would suggest that your climate action plan closely mirror, if not adopt, those metrics and targets in scope, scale, and schedule, since we really only have about 7 years left to make the significant transformational change, or the tipping points, both in climate and in ecosystems, will have been crossed. And then beyond that point, most of our efforts will be futile. So I strongly suggest we use as this frame of reference, this internationally accepted goal. Thousands of scientists all over the world have established these. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Let's tie our wagon to that scope, scale, and schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. That's a very, very helpful comment, and we've been definitely keeping close eye on the IPPC work throughout this process. So thank you for that helpful suggestion. Rebecca, who do we have for the next commenter?
Katie, we have Mr. Sean Gosieski. Mr. Gosieski, you are unmuted.
Hello, everybody. Sean Gosieski with Resilient Cities and Communities, and I'm the Minnesota Green Step Cities Best Practice Advisor for Community Engagement. And for your question related to collaboration opportunities, I have great news that in the annual Green Step Cities survey, more than 40 cities responded that they would be interested in participating in an annual city-county climate action check-in event. So I'm working to convene cities by county to be able to look at the actions they've been able to get done the previous year, what they want to get done in the next year, and how they can tie in with their county to ramp up collaborative implementation of high impact actions. So I would love to work with both the Met Council to work on that with the metro cities and do that with the regional sustainable development partnerships outside of the metro, because many of the things require actions both on the city and county level. And so I'm curious with your panelists, what other ways you can see advancing city and county level climate implementation related to your framework goals and strategies. And if this idea of the city-county climate action check-ins might fit in with that.
Great, thank you. Thank you for that comment and that helpful idea. And that's definitely something we can take back, and we know how to find you as well. So that would be a great step to think about in terms of collaboration. Rebecca, are there other commenters?
Katie, we don't have any more commenters at the moment.
Okay, well, I would encourage you. We have. I saw
we have two hands that came up as I was saying that. First, we have Amelia Boss. I'm unmuting her. Amelia, you should be able to participate. I can hear you.
Okay, great. Just a brief comment in response, Katie, to your question about how we bring and more people on board and how we really do this collectively. I would encourage our state agencies to really be a bearer of a specific message, because I think you're all uniquely situated in that you are interfacing with new projects and project proposers in all different fields all the time. And I think there has kind of been a messaging for a long time that climate change is, an environmental concern, and people who care about the environment are concerned about it. But I think now there's a really good opportunity to start talking about climate as something that's really beneficial, not just because we care about the environment and the future health of the planet, but because it's also going to make sense for businesses, their ability to continue to exist in the location they're currently at, and their bottom line going forward. And I think we've seen this acutely with the agricultural sector, that farmers are really on the front lines of a changing climate and are experiencing a lot of impacts because their livelihood is so dependent on weather patterns. And so I think part of bringing more people into this conversation and making this an easier collective path forward is just using opportunities when you're working with project proposers to reframe some of the conversations about how this really does make sense for you looking forward in terms of, is your facility going to be able to be here in 15 to 20 years if you don't plan for increased rainfall events? Or, it's also a lot less costly to plan for, a full electrification of a building now when you're building it versus trying to go back in and retrofit that. So I think there's lots of benefits to new projects and project proposers who have maybe traditionally been more opposed to taking climate action, and opportunities for them to see that this is really in everybody's best interest, whether you're looking at it from an environmental perspective or a business perspective.
Thank you for that comment. I think that's really great perspective and something I think we're seeing just public discourse more broadly changing that, changing the either or mentality that we've too often had on these questions of climate action and environmental action, and changing it to kind of recognizing that there's mutual benefits if we do this right. So thank you for that important comment. Next commenter. Rebecca, I don't know if you have another commenter to queue up. We're not hearing you if you're muted. Oh, it looks like Rebecca's having some technical difficulties, but I do see that Sarah Wolf has your hand raised. Sarah, go ahead. I think hopefully one of my team can, it looks like you're unmuted, so go ahead and jump in.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I'm Sarah Wolf and I'm in St. Paul, and I really appreciate this opportunity for discussion and for the way you framed that up, Director Pratt, for this, that it can be a response to other questions that have come before and thinking about that. And so I was glad to hear Mr. Matson's comments earlier about the IPCC goals and how we are, whether we're thinking about that. And I was wondering, Director Pratt, if there was any more you might be able to say about how the EQB is thinking about that, or other agencies about those IPCC goals, or do you hope to be considering adopting that? And if not, what might be the barriers or remaining questions that need to be explored? And what could citizens do to help explore that and help the state get to making that commitment? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. And I don't see any more hands raised at this point. So we'll kind of deviate here a little bit and just go with the flow. And I would like to just put that question on the table for my colleagues and for EQB members and climate subcabinet members and folks who are on the call. I think, I think each agency, as I've observed, is looking at that within their jurisdictions and their programming is what is the IPPC saying relevant to our agencies. But I would turn it over to some of my colleagues and see if anybody has any specific responses to that question. Commissioner Kessler, I see you.
If nobody else wants to weigh in, I will thank Sarah for her question and kind of reiterate that we are following the what's happening on the international stage and what goals are beyond the goals currently in Minnesota closely. And that is included in work at the EQB, as well as some of the proposals that we've put forward through the legislature. I will note that I appreciate everyone's engagement in this process, because I think if we're going to get anything more aggressive than what we currently have, we need to have a really big cry for it across the state. And from an MPCA perspective, we're still defending work we did last session at the state legislature around electric vehicles in the state and electric vehicle infrastructure, which I think is something that we've heard others ask for. So anything that is construed as expanding authorities and going beyond what the legislature has previously adopted is met very aggressively by some as an overreach. And I'll just put that out there. That is a reality that we're dealing with. And I am hopeful that if we can get more voices raising this up as a nonpartisan priority and set of actions that supports jobs and innovation and brings resiliency, that we can move faster. But we cannot do that alone at the state agencies.
Thank you for that perspective, Commissioner Kessler. And I don't know if others have comments on kind of alignment with IPCC. I think one thing I would just offer in question to Sarah Wolf's question is, I think getting the IPCC insights and conclusions into the hands of more Minnesotans is also a step in this. I think there's many kind of folks on this meeting who work on climate very closely. You understand and follow and digest those IPPC reports and read those conclusions, and they make sense, and you can understand why there's an urgency there. I would say that message is maybe not getting across to all communities. And I know that there were some hearings at the legislature that looked at some of the IPPC reports and conclusions. I think we need more of that. I think we need more talking about earlier EQB meeting this fall. We talked about the IPCC work. So I think we need more of that. We need more of getting that IPPC into the hands of people so that people understand why the state is trying to work towards those goals and why they're so important. Go ahead, Commissioner Arnold.
Yeah, I think, I'll build on Commissioner Kessler's that, the state agencies can't do this by ourselves. And picking up a little bit on something Anne said earlier, taking something that's sort of as large and broad scale as the IPCC goals and making them relevant to my next door neighbor and to Anne and her next door neighbors and people who are kind of throughout Minnesota, I think is a challenge for all of us. And I would encourage you all to think about how we can do that together and how we can really speak to people about the things that they want to do and they want to be working on. And that's something we've thought a lot about in the green energy space. There are a lot of people who want to have a more energy efficient house. So how do we kind of bring that together? And then it's achieving the goals, but it's a very practical, like I'm doing a remodel. How do I do that? Well, and so I try to think about that as much as possible. And I would encourage you all to help us to, make those really tangible connections as much as we can.
Yeah, and back to Sarah Wolf's comment, I think there was a part of the comment that was an invitation to help us, and I would say yes, yes, we need that help. I think digesting this conversation today and giving us, we'll explain at the end of this meeting, there's an additional opportunity to provide comments and thinking about what are the ways that we can do some of these things, giving us some concrete ideas, absolutely open for. And when we say state agencies can't do it alone, I also want to say state agencies are working really hard. We're trying, but we need new ideas. We need new solutions. We need some creative approaches and need you all to help us with that. I'm checking with my EQB team. I don't see any additional hands raised, but correct me if I'm wrong. I do wonder if there's an opportunity. I can't see the Slido answers, but if there's an opportunity to maybe pull up some of the responses that we got via Slido and just look at those together. Great. So I'll just read some of these. What do you want to make sure is captured in this framework? Centering youth and BIPOC voices by giving decision-making authority to those voices rather than extracting and consulting. That's great. That's a great point. And I think there's a lot of sensitivity. This came up in I had a work group meeting this morning with our healthy communities group, and we were really talking about that. What are the pieces we need to have in place to lift up voices and listen to those voices rather than just asking for input and feedback. And let's see, Faith, are there other comments down? Just kind of reading the top line. Hopefully you all are in Slido and can read these in more depth. Equity needs to be central in the finalization of this framework. Goals need to be developed to ensure progress is made. Racism, the pandemic, and climate change are health crises and have impacted poor and BIPOC communities first, worst, and longest. That is a great, a really great point, and you saw it in Frank's presentation that equity is one of the 3 core pieces of the vision that we're putting forward, but we recognize that, you know, we have work to do to make that actionable. So I encourage you to look at the framework from that perspective, and, you know, provide us any input that you have on how can we make equity more concrete. Each of the goal sections in the framework does have some narrative on equity, and was some of the action areas also address equity, but I encourage you to think about how we can go further with that. Detailed plans, objective tactics, see Maine won't wait. Okay, these are great specific suggestions of places we can look for places where there may be kind of really actionable tactics that we can look at. Include an appendix of high impact city and county greenhouse gas and resiliency actions, Green Step Cities. Great, I'm just kind of reading these, thinking about the transportation sector, which is so important. Support for alternative modes of transportation. Great. These are really great comments. I won't read each one, but these are ones that we will take back. And again, we're getting a lot of input as we look at this draft framework, and these are really helpful to us. I do see another hand raised here. So we can take this down, yes, and I'll go to our commenter, Peter Wagenius. We'll get you unmuted here. There, you should be unmuted. Go ahead and make your comment.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I just wanted to follow up on Sarah Wolf's comment. I think we can all appreciate that there is resistance at the state legislature to many of the individual initiatives we need to implement in order to address climate change. But the plan itself the framework itself does not require approval of the state legislature. And that's a good thing, because if we treated this sequentially, like we needed their approval first before developing a realistic framework, we would never get it and we wouldn't be able to move forward. So I would just encourage us to all to take the advice that we were provided and all work together to change that reality at the Capitol. But that shouldn't affect writing a really great framework. Since it doesn't require their approval, we should take the opportunity to educate the public about what real climate action looks like, regardless of their approval, which we don't need.
Thank you. No, that's important. I think it echoes those earlier comments we had in the panel discussion. And again, I encourage you to go back in and identify in particular places where you think the suggested actions need to be more ambitious. We welcome that specific feedback. I'm just pausing for a minute to see if there's any questions. And there's a question in the chat with some question about what is the purpose of the framework, going back to the purpose of the framework, and whether it will be going to the legislature. So really the framework is a document that is put together by the Climate Change Subcabinet. So these are members of the executive branch in collaboration with external partners, with the Climate Advisory Council, and hopefully with as many Minnesotans as we can get input on, that sets a vision for how we need to start moving forward on climate action from here. What can we start to work on right away? And the way I've kind of described this to some colleagues is, I see the framework as maybe an umbrella document that presents a shared vision, but there might be other documents, more specific plans, more technical work that needs to happen underneath the framework to build it out and make it actionable, as well as there are specific legislative policies that are moving forward right now and will move forward in future legislative sessions that try to move forward on the actions that are outlined in the framework. So hopefully that gives a little bit more clarity about the purpose. Any other questions? Or I want to also just invite my colleagues, and we're getting to closing out here. So, you know, my colleagues, other state leaders, EQB public board members, I encourage you to speak up as well. Any closing thoughts that you might want to leave the audience with today based on this conversation? I see Marco Hernandez. I hear your hand raised. Go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, I guess for what I wanted to add and for people to think about, especially for the state agencies, and when we keep doing the climate framework, is that a lot of the stuff that we're proposing, especially when it comes to new infrastructure, buildings that meet green requirements as well. You know, there's also going to be the need for jobs. And I think something that we can't forget is, especially with the newly signed bipartisan infrastructure bill signed by the Biden administration, there's a need for those types of professionals that are capable of executing those types of projects that will bring our state to the 21st century, that will bring our infrastructure, our transportation especially. And so one thing that I don't want people to forget is that what's critical, especially when it comes to funding, is to also have worker centers that are across the state, not only in the metro, but also in areas outside in rural Minnesota, so that we can bring up those who are Black, Indigenous, people of color, those who come from poor white communities, especially those that come from mining communities as well in northern Minnesota. And so it's definitely going to be important that, especially with the pandemic, a lot of people who have lost their jobs or are looking for something new to train themselves in. It's really important that we put some funding into apprenticeship programs, and worker centers so that we can equitably bring Minnesota into the 21st century and to have, you know, bringing us into those green standards as well. And so that's what I want to leave everybody here in the group with that. Thank you so much, Director Pratt.
Thank you, Marco. Very helpful and very important piece to remember in this puzzle. Any other comments before I turn it back to Commissioner? Oh, I see another hand raised from the audience. Audrey Kingstrom, we'll get you unmuted here. You should be unmuted. Go ahead and share your comment.
Well, I don't know how helpful this is because I'm not exactly sure how much promotional work the agencies can do. But I think to the last speaker's just comments about the resistance to the way we're running our economy and stuff, whatever we can do that's positive, and say, if all the agencies can work towards a very positive message about addressing climate change that speaks to our values of green jobs, of keeping Minnesota beautiful, of, you know, caring for everything, that everything is just very positive messaging and then related to the economy and to our lifestyle in Minnesota. We need a positive message if we're going to get buy-in. I hear you say that the agencies can't do everything, but I'm a concerned citizen, a strong environmentalist, and the people that I talk to and around me, they need a positive message. And however we can get that across, through ads, through the messaging, through the work, through work centers, everything that's done just needs to be positive, that meets the needs of people, to break down the resistance to the change, the radical change that we really have to make in our society and in our state. So everyone has to strategize, and those of you who have those skills too, to help the residents here in Minnesota to feel good about taking these actions.
Thank you for that comment, and I hear the real heartfelt nature of your comment, and that really resonates with me, and I think resonates with many of the discussions I have with my colleagues, that we do care, and if it were simple, we would be there already. And so how do we get those positive messages? How do we craft those messages and get them out to people who can listen? Sometimes the state puts messaging out and it doesn't get to the right places. So how do we amplify that? How do we connect, and how do we keep trying new tools to get us there? So I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the real concern and heartfelt concern that everyone today has brought forward to this framework. And I'll turn it over to Commissioner Kessler here in a second, but my hope is, after leaving this meeting today, that you may not agree with everything in the way that the framework is structured, and that's okay, but can you be on that journey with us and help us make it better and help this work move faster? That's a hope that I have. So with that, I'm not seeing anyone else, so I will turn it to Commissioner. Oh, I do see Nancy Daubenberger. Go ahead and chime in.
Thank you, Katie. And I just thought I'd use this opportunity to mention, it's a little bit in alignment with the previous question about IPCC goals alignment. But back in 2017, MnDOT updated our statewide multimodal transportation plan. And as part of that, we adopted the Next Gen Energy Act goals for the state transportation sector. And now we are in the process of updating that again. It's every 5 years. And in that process, we are looking to align with the IPCC goals that go up and beyond the next gen goals. And we are, in the coming months, going to be seeking public input on that. We'll be having engagement opportunities. So just wanted to put it out there for this whole group, those who chimed in, those who listened in, but to please look for that. We'll be seeking public input on our statewide multimodal transportation plan update, and you'll see some of these goals reflected in it. Thank you.
That's great. Terrific. Okay, Commissioner Kessler, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Katie. And I just want to raise up what both Marco and Audrey said before me. I 100% agree that we need to have a big coalition that emphasizes economic opportunity and the positive stories that we know exist out there, the opportunities that are really nonpartisan and all about supporting one another as citizens of this state. And hopefully you see yourself in that work with us. I think we're trying to do that, and hopefully it comes through in the framework. We've got examples of work happening within tribes and elsewhere that we want to show as positive examples and positive ways to move forward. So this is the beginning, and really appreciate everyone leaning in with us. So thanks at this point to everyone who shared their perspective on our needed climate action. I think it's clear from this conversation that we do all have a role to play in finding the solutions that work for us. And certainly we as the state agencies are taking that very seriously. You can see that through not only the draft framework, but the budget that we have recommended. And I think it's clear to us, and hopefully to you, that the magnitude of climate change and impact on every aspect of our lives requires very bold thinking, as well as an integrative response that pulls the very best out. So this again is, where are we doing this well, and how can we raise it up? So this is really going to require all of us. And we encourage you to think about where you fit in the framework, and what is your role in achieving this vision? Is it sharing this opportunity with your network? Is it providing suggestions on metrics or specific initiatives or revised state goals? And I think that the last question in Slido is about this. How might you play a role in moving climate action forward? So state staff will collect the information your responses related to this question and all of the information that we've gathered through Slido and integrate that into our framework. And I also want to highlight that this is ongoing through the next 6 weeks. State agencies will be continuing conversations with Minnesotans about the framework and collecting feedback online. And we encourage you to visit the website. I think it's mn.gov/framework to share any ideas you have. Encourage your friends, your neighbors, your family to do the same. Your input isn't just helpful, it's really essential. And we can only be successful in this work if we get more perspectives and more opportunities, or more people seeing this as an opportunity to weigh in not only on the challenge, but a part of the solution. So what is next? What does this look like for us? The climate action framework will be released by the climate subcabinet in mid-2022. So that will be the point where we will finalize the document in consideration of all of the input that we've received. So that's not that far away. And it's exciting to think about, but also daunting that this is the path that we are paving to navigate us forward on this really complex challenge. And I hope you share the excitement of those you've heard from on the call today. I think together we can really make progress. And I, for one, see pride in this effort, and hopefully you see yourself in the effort and can be proud of that as well. So thanks again to the members of the Climate Subcabinet who participated today and for your work to date, as well as the Environmental Quality Board staff and the Advisory Committee and others who chimed in. Really appreciate the conversation. So at this point, we're happy to say have a good rest of your day, and we'll be in touch.